Hi, Praggies, and welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. I'm State Senator Tiara Mack, and I'm joined by attorney Rachel Cohen. And today we're going to talk about the continued action in the Caribbean, in Venezuela, and U.S.'s involvement. Recently, the president of Venezuela made a statement that basically said the United States is only illegally bombing our ships in the Caribbean in order to create the conditions to take over our oil reserves. And if you haven't been watching and if you haven't been listening to American news cycles for the last, 20 years, you know that attacking other countries in order to take over their oil reserves is kind of our MO and is not a crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. One of the things that I think is I won't say exciting, but I do love when white men fail, especially those who are even told that they are terrible by their mothers and who also leak war plans through group chats, continue to fail, including the investigation into Pete Hegseth for potentially condoning illegal war crimes in the Caribbean by indiscriminately bombing boats in the Caribbean that were presumed or alleged with absolutely no basis and no fact to be carrying drugs into the United States. I believe it is Democratic Senator Tim Kaine who is leading the charge on this investigation, bipartisan investigation into Pete Hegseth. So Rachel, I know we had an episode that we should have titled Tiara and Rachel Were Right, but the evolution of the boat strikes in the Caribbean that started in mid to late September and have now increased to over 10, but dozens or more dead in the Caribbean, now leading to U.S. occupying the airspace and starting skirmishes in Venezuela, a country that has already had about 8 million people leave due to the instability. What does this continue to say about U.S. involvement in foreign affairs and Trump, the self-proclaimed no war president, starting another conflict really close to U.S. soil?
I think the number one thing that it says about American politics is that Donald Trump realizes how unpopular he is, because one of the ways to get kind of unified American sentiment behind a president historically has been to start a war. Though I think in this particular instance, we're seeing Donald Trump really bait a war in Venezuela in a way that I think is likely to backfire upon him, where we're talking about really trying to get the Venezuelan government to react. Over and over again, there have been targeting of people that are out unconfirmed drug trafficking, saying that they're fishermen. I am inclined to believe that at least some of the people that have been murdered in these airstrikes are in fact fishermen and are being smeared by the Trump administration to justify attacks on Venezuela that will ultimately bait retaliation that then allows us to invade and allows Donald Trump to kind of consolidate power in this way, because it's important to remember that there are certain war powers that if a war is declared, the president has, that make it easier for Donald Trump to continue to expand his kind of authoritarian takeover of the United States itself. Right now, he's using ICE as his secret police, but we could see additional consolidated power. We could see things like a draft. And all of this is unlikely, I think. I think it's unlikely that Donald Trump would institute a draft. We haven't seen that in all 50 years, and it would be incredibly unpopular. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump cares about maintaining power more than all else, and his administration cares about maintaining power and white supremacy more than everything else. So I think that's what it tells us about the United States kind of sentiment on the ground. And I think the other thing that it tells us broadly geopolitically is that we as a country get away with far too much meddling. That's a euphemism. That's even when you said skirmishes, it reminded me of when people write about like ICE agents attacking people and call them clashes. But here I am doing it too. The United States meddling, the United States bombing another country.
Illegally bombing
another country because it knows that it can get away with it despite international condemnation for doing so. That's devastating. And I think that we like to pretend that the kind of brutal imperialism that was foundational for the United States, foundational for many European powers, that is in the past, that we don't act like that anymore. That we see people acting like they learned lessons from the Iraq War and the invasion of Afghanistan. And instead, we see people now not learning those lessons at all. And the last thing that I do want to say, and then I'll kick it back to you, is in these conversations, a lot of times on the internet, there seems to be a very strong, assumption that when people on the left are criticizing Donald Trump's actions in Venezuela, they're supportive of Nicolas Maduro. And I want to be very clear for our listeners that Maduro is not, at this point, he likely is not democratically elected. It was it was an election rife with inaccuracy. It was an election where he refused to step down despite it being disputed. The reason that 8 million people have fled are partially because, or largely because, of the actions of Nicolas Maduro. And just because he is an authoritarian from the left does not mean that it is like a kinder, gentler authoritarianism. But the United States is happy to work with the exact same situation. That's the exact same positioning of Bukele and El Salvador, who we work with incredibly closely. Mm-hmm. And so I would just ask our listeners to be able to hold a little bit of that kind of complicated emotion of, we're not supportive of these kind of authoritarian regimes here, but the solution is not to incite war with them, particularly when it's very clear that the real motivations for that are access to oil and shoring up support and power for Donald Trump in the United States. Because the way that you liberate a people is not by dropping bombs on them indiscriminately. And now I will kick it back to you.
Well, Rachel, two things came up for me. And if anyone hasn't seen the HBO most recent rendition of Watchmen, there's this scene and there's this undercurrent where the US ends the war in Vietnam and Vietnam becomes the 51st state. I think it is very real that the United States in some alternative universe is occupying the airspace, isolating ourselves from our partners. I believe in the last episode, we talked about how the UK is no longer sharing intelligence information with the US because of our illegal strikes in the Caribbean against Venezuelan ships that are carrying likely civilians. No evidence otherwise has proved that these are not civilians, because there's also been no due process, which is, again, illegal. But I'm reading a book called Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here, and it is also not some crazy tinfoil hat. I do recommend it. I was listening to another podcast where someone recommended Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here by Jonathan Blitzer. I just actually purchased it when I was in Chicago for 2 seconds on a cross-country train ride. I'm going to start reading that, and it really does, I believe, do a good job of covering what is happening and how the U.S. has destabilized Central America that led to us seeing intervention in this. Oh my God, book twins!
I need to start it. Andrea, my best friend got me this for Christmas.
Oh my God, let's do a book club, because I literally just purchased it.
No, literally.
Book club, real time.
We'll keep y'all updated.
we will tie that up with a bow, but you will see that book coming back. But one of the things I think gives me hope is that no one is normalizing this. And I think this is where we can wrap up our episode, is what gives me hope. People are seeing these unauthorized attacks. There is a bipartisan investigation now into Pete Hegseth ordering the kill everyone on these ships. I don't remember the exact quote. I have a link to an article that we'll put in our show notes. But this is concerning not just for Republicans and Democrats, or not just for Democrats, but also for Republicans who see the U.S.'s place on the global stage being threatened by these illegal actions. We also, in a show of the military not being owned by Donald Trump, we had 6 Democrats who told fellow soldiers and fellow veterans, if you were told to do something illegal, don't do it. And now they're being investigated. I think for the first time in modern history, we're seeing people take lessons that we've learned. You don't need to blindly follow authority. You don't need to blindly listen to what some authoritarian is saying. You can fight back, and people are taking those little bits of lessons. There are so many things to be hopeful about, and there are so many ways that this cycle of neo-fascism are not landing the same way I think they would have 50, 60, or 70 years ago. More people have a backbone. I wish desperately that more people had several more bones in their back, but we're seeing more people who are less willing to bend than I think in previous generations would have. And I think it says something that the Democrats who are standing up for service members and for veterans are not the radical lefties. These are some of the moderate Democrats from some pretty like moderate states who are saying that we are going to tell people we're going to use our platforms and they're going to be investigated now, I believe, by the FBI, and they've been called in for interviews. And then we have, again, bipartisan legislators on both sides who are like, you know what, this Pete Hegseth guy, we weren't able to get him on the group chat, the War Plans group chat, but we might be able to get him on international war crimes against a country that we have no business occupying or being involved in their airspace or on the ground, or killing their civilians indiscriminately. So that is what is giving me hope, Praggies. I hope that there are some things that are giving you hope. You know that we also are going to be sending some book recommendations. I hope this has been helpful. And again, you can like, follow, subscribe, and share with your network. We will be back with more episodes, and we hope you take care. Bye, Praggies.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.